Everybody check your hair.
Yeah.
Dev chat live. Sweet. We are working. It works.
It works. Cool.
Go, Blake.
Yes.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Blake. I'm one of the senior app developers here at Crema. For a little bit of context, Dev Chat is some time we set aside every 2 weeks as a development team to get together. Sometimes we have formal presentations about topics. Sometimes we do workshops and we just work through stuff. And sometimes we just have free-form conversations where we chat about stuff related to development, stuff that's on our mind, stuff we're working on. It's fun. That's the time to connect as a dev team, especially now. Yeah. So this time, we're gonna take a step back from more technical conversations, although I'm sure it'll go technical because they always do, and talk about how we work at Crema, focusing on the team aspect of it, which of course impacts everything we do, from how we collaborate, how we interact with clients, all the processes, and even what tools we use. So I think it'll be fun. I think we've got lots of opinions. So I'll start us off with a pretty easy question. What does a product team, which is how we work here at Crema, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Collective.
Everybody.
Everyone takes. There we go.
Oh, let me think about that.
It feels like it's like a quiz right now.
Yeah,
This is a quiz.
I don't want to get this wrong.
I was waiting for the multiple choice answers to pop up so I could select one.
I go to crema.us. I think it first implies that it's cross-discipline, right? Because you have a product team isn't by one craft or one group of designers or developers or product managers or whatever. It has to be cross-discipline. So I think that's like square one.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it have to be cross-discipline though? Why can't we all just developers do what we want?
Because there are people who do things way better than I do in lots of ways.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't want me doing your end-to-end product.
I think a kind of a prime example would be kind of the interaction that the whole team has, specifically when it comes to testing. You need test engineers who are able to look at the product with a fresh perspective, not necessarily they haven't been looking at the code, but they are looking at it from the perspective of the user, and we need that level of protection before we release features, because I can't count the times that Courtney or Ashley have caught issues that are just kind of glaring that I just glossed over because I was just too in it. So that's an example of somebody else's skill set really coming in and augmenting the entire team, right? So
and kind of that same thing, but in a wider perspective, like developers are bad at seeing their own bugs that they create, and designers can sometimes be so zoomed in on their own designs that they're not seeing something from a development perspective. So everyone's coming to the problem from a different angle and kind of finding a consensus that works for everyone.
Yeah, there's definitely a benefit to working directly with your designer in a project instead of having that middleman. The designer can come up and be like, here are the pretty things. And then I can either be like, I will do my best, or this is a bit out of scope, or this is something that might not be able to be implemented in this sprint. And it's just that direct contact, with your designer. It feels like we're all in this together. We're all building this together. And yeah, you get to know other people's roles a bit better too. And you get to understand what kind of obstacles they might be facing. So instead of just building, from a dev perspective, so just building a feature and just tossing it up into the air and seeing, whoever picks it up next down the line or down the chain, you kind of have that, you're physically yourself handing that off to the next space or taking that from the person up ahead in that chain, like a designer or product manager, whoever.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and the same applies from the business side too, right? Like you kind of have like these business needs, but everybody working together kind of lets you build the best feature that you can to accommodate like those business needs. And sometimes like design might change, dev might change, the business side of things might change, but it's all because we get to work together in that capacity to come up with the best, sometimes most efficient, sometimes most robust, whatever is needed at that time to come up with the best solution and the best features.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to get like the product owner, some decision maker, the client, like in the product team. They're a member of the team. I think that's hugely important for all the reasons you said, which is not, I guess, not obvious, but it is obvious once you have experienced it. Like, yeah, why wouldn't they be a part of the team?
Yeah, and I think you're always balancing constraints and appropriate solutions, and it can often feel like if you don't have that product owner in the mix in the day-to-day, you don't really know what the real world constraints are or how they've changed. And so I think sometimes we can want to operate in this vacuum of like the ideal, but that's just not the way software production works. They're real people who are paying real money for something that solves hopefully a real problem in the right way. And so it's up to the whole team to be able to
the mushrooms.
Mushrooms. It's up to the whole team to be able
Someone
to.
was asking me something.
It's all good. I don't know what I was saying. Anyways, just keeping an eye on those real world constraints is key. So you need that product owner in there.
Yeah, and they can also help us. Yeah, the product owner can also help us learn and continually learn the business domain, because we're not always experts, and we're probably not experts in the domain, but if they're in the team, they're helping reinforce that, because that's why you're building the product. You're in that domain, solving that domain's problem. So
yeah, for sure.
I don't know. I also want to say that it's fun. Like you get all these cross disciplines together and you don't wind up stuck in your own little bubble. You kind of get to see all these different perspectives, and it's fun to be able to collaborate cross discipline too.
that's definitely hugely important. We probably work a lot better when we're also having fun.
Yeah.
Being passionate about something is important.
I see someone in chat saying they're currently in a team meeting and they're talking about this exact same topic right now. So yay. That's good stuff. Nice. Also, we have someone from Uganda watching as well. So hello to Uganda. That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Or it's a VPN. I mean, no.
I was thinking that too. I was like, it could be VPN, but also.
Well, they say it's evening there, so it's evening in Uganda. But no, this is good stuff. The product team thing is really important to Crema, and it's fun. It's neat when when you've been on a team that says they want to be they want to include everyone, regardless of what that looks like within your organization. It really does change the way you think, because you have to consider the other people involved. And it's easy to throw stuff over the fence to one another. And I think one thing that we've found very, very important is, like, even when it's really awkward, it's more important that we all stay in lockstep than it is that one discipline get it their way. And that shows to the client as well, because even in a meeting, I can defer to a designer and say, hey, what do you think would be the best way to do this? And the clients see that and they perceive that value and that collaboration. So it's just a byproduct you get by just wanting to be as inclusive as possible within the whole structure of a team.
So I guess diving into that notion of like collaboration with other departments or even interdepartment, how does a product team like really encourage that? And like, I guess, what does that collaboration actually look like and what are the benefits there? Everyone take a sip of coffee to think.
I'd say it would start with sprints, right? A lot of cases people meet every 2 weeks or so, maybe every other week or every week. Everyone sits in the same room, gets on the same page, and discuss the feature that we all want to tackle for that sprint, and I think that is a really good time for everyone from every different discipline to be like, okay, these are, the concerns I have with this aspect, or, if we have any questions for each other, that's the best time to get in and do that. And also the stakeholders are a lot of time involved in that as well. So, like you're getting that feedback, exactly, that what you're working on is exactly what they're asking for, and you're checking in and you're getting all of that feedback live. So I think, so it definitely starts there.
Yeah,
It's
Alexa
really common. Oh,
mentioned
go for it, Joel.
the idea of a chain and passing along the work, kind of like a relay race or something. But it can be like that, just time wise. But in this sort of working, there's always a lot of like feedback loops that have to happen for communication to be working well. Like I know I have, and some of us have worked at companies that work in a much more siloed, separated way, and I think this way works a lot better.
Yeah, I was going to say, even though you have those regular touch points, inevitably, some point when you actually are sitting down and building the thing, suddenly you realize, oh, there's this whole detail that we didn't even think about, but now it's hitting me in the face, right? And so oftentimes what that looks like is calling or slacking Sean or somebody and saying, hey, can you look at something with me, and just getting together and talking through it. And then kind of there on the spot, working out maybe a tenable solution, and then communicating that to the rest of the team. But really we have that ability to adapt to those unforeseen those unforeseen challenges. They always come up, like that's just a given, right? So I think having that close communication allows you to not spin your wheels or wait till the next sprint meeting or something like that to get unstuck or come to a good solution. So I think that's key as well, just kind of reducing the distance between all of the roles that need to interact is what it's all about. So.
Yeah, another aspect of that too, and like what you were talking about, Joel, with the feedback loops, is most of our product teams will have daily scrums, stand-ups, that's the word, daily stand-ups, where you can talk about like blockers that you're running into. And that way you're not just spinning your wheels on something. There's like a space where you can come, and the intention of it is to bring like issues that you're running into. So it keeps those lines of communication open by just having that structure in place.
Yeah, and I also would like to add that we always have multiple developers working on the same project. So there's always code reveal happening and that constant feedback, trying to keep the code quality as good as it can be.
To Joel's point too, on having worked other places where you're more siloed, I think the way we do it at Crema keeps it so that you're actually invested in what you're coding, because it's really hard to kind of like sit there waiting to get handed over like some feature that you didn't have any input on, and that maybe is like frustrating even for whatever reason to implement, right? So like having that space to have that input keeps you emotionally and practically invested in what you're building.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go any further, I just want to shout out to our awesome product managers, because they do a lot of that machine oiled communication wise.
Yeah, they're very much the glue.
Yeah, I couldn't and I wouldn't want to do what they do. So
It's funny, you like sometimes, I think most of us devs fall in that trap sometimes of like, I'm pretty good at self-managing, like I can take care of stuff. And then you get into it, and then if you've ever been on a project without a dedicated PM and you get plowing forward and you're just like, I'm pretty good at this, then one thing happens, you go, help, like where's mom and dad? It's just like I need a PM.
Yeah, well, even having just like a communication buffer, somebody
Yeah.
to filter some of that communication out and give you what's relevant. Not a barrier, but at least just a thin buffer. It's very, very handy, just for mental health and focus and all that. So.
Or like a traffic cop, like directing traffic, like just making sure it's more efficient. They're not stopping anyone.
Switchboard operator.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. The analogies abound, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of the structured meetings, all of the things we talked about, Scrum, stand up, those are the pieces that we put into place that help us build trust, that enable all the smaller day-to-day interactions. And that's really a big part of it. It's like without those structured things, maybe we wouldn't feel as free to communicate in between that time. I just think that's an important aspect, and it plays into the roles we have and the way we communicate with each other as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot of trust in a product team, right? We really trust every single craft to get their job done, because we know they will. They've proved it, but that's what enables us all to really focus in on our craft.
yeah, and not just like trust them to get the job done, yes, but also like trust them to kind of keep the greater good in mind, which again, that collaboration is just going to help so much with that, because you're constantly sort of thinking of the product as a whole, and the team as a whole.
Right. Those meetings are all really good about alignment, keeping alignment, and then the in between is sort of figuring out all the details. I guess people already said that, but yeah.
What if we focus in even further on like developer to developer collaboration or code review, like all those, like how does that work while we're on a product team? I know it varies wildly based on if there's more than one developer or what kind of project we're working on, but it's everyone's experience with that.
It's definitely changed a little recently. Yeah, I feel like, well, and I actually think that we've become more efficient about it. Like I was kind of talking to Rob about this the other day. It's like, you're not having somebody walk over to you, right? Because sometimes it's async communication, sometimes it's in person, face to face, whether that be online or whatever. But you're not having somebody walk over to your desk and kind of like try to grab you and start collaborating on something, right? So we're having to schedule a lot of that, I think, at least I am. Which on the one hand, like, it's not as organic. It's not as like when needed necessarily, but it is, it does tend to be more efficient. So there's a lot of that, a lot of like scheduling for peer programming. VS Code Live is something that's been used before, sharing your screen, sharing up branches with Git so that we can kind of take a look at each other's work. But yeah, recently I think it's been a lot more efficient in terms of scheduling stuff out.
Yeah, has everyone here used that VS Code Live Share? It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah,
it feels
great.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty seamless. But one time I was working with ULEX, and it mistracked the changes or something, and then suddenly we had all this garbage typed up on the screen.
Oh no.
It's not perfect yet, but yeah, it's really
Yeah.
nice.
I like the GitHub like integration for VS Code, so you can like whenever you're setting up a like shared session, if somebody goes in, you're both working on the same file or whatever. When you go to commit, it pulls in the people that worked on that file as like collaborators, and I was like, that's pretty cool, like that.
Yeah, I think
about code. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to talk about code reviews specifically. I think that's one of the habits we've continued to press into, and one of the reasons why we have typically on a product team more than one developer, because you really need that second pair of eyes to just look over your work and point out kind of obvious things that are going to trip us up as a team down the road. Question certain decisions, but yeah, or even just getting in there and seeing what other people's code is and what it's doing, and just to make sure that we have a shared kind of understanding of how things are being built. So that's something that's baked into our process. You know, typically we require code reviews, and you know, a PR approval before you can merge stuff. So we're not just kind of randomly merging code without anybody seeing what we've done. So that's huge.
That's also changed for me pretty recently too. Like, whereas before there was a lot of that in-person collaboration happening, sometimes somebody might not get to see your code before you put it into a PR. So like I've been having to open those way earlier to start getting feedback on those way earlier, which it's good practice at any time, but that's definitely been helpful lately.
Yeah, I don't think people do that as much often, which they should do more. I know on our team, when we were on a team last fall, we were looking a lot of just posting stuff out there because we're like, this is how we think we're going to do the project. Are you guys okay with this approach? And it could be more than just like the final code sign up. It could be like you're going to, it's, you know, is this the right track for this feature?
Yeah, I've seen the benefit of that a lot more. Being remote is just getting feedback more frequently. And like you were saying, Gabby, it's kind of harder to do because you have to be intentional about it, like Slack someone or like push up your PR and ask someone to look at it. But it's, I think like once you get over like, or for me at least, a few weeks into quarantine, like getting over the initial friction of it, you're like, okay, this is the new normal. Like I have to reach out more often. And I really do like the opening a PR early. Like you can open a work in progress. Is that what it's called? I'm using GitLab right now, so I'm getting confused between
Draft?
GitLab and GitHub.
Like a draft pool?
A draft, that's it, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a draft PR is helpful too.
Yeah, it's one thing that I've started doing differently since we've started this whole quarantine thing is just making those commits a lot more frequently and getting stuff pushed up to GitHub to get that feedback. And I think that like it's super beneficial for me because it's given me kind of more structure when I'm working, because I'll finish something out, commit it, and I'll be like, okay, so now what's the next step in the process? But then it's also just beneficial for whoever's reviewing your code, because then it's easier to say, oh, okay, this is what they were doing at this commit. And it just makes the process a little bit easier, I think.
It's like showing your work versus just boom, the work's there, right? So you can kind of track that flow of thought, I guess. Yeah.
Another thing I've done, if a PR is too big for someone else to review, what I'll do is I'll leave little comments kind of where I think the important bits are, the points that I really want someone to take a look at, just to make sure that that gets reviewed, which I found really helpful if it's a large PR, which I try to avoid, but you can't always.
I'm gonna call out Byron because he's really good at that. Of we've done some pretty not hefty PRs, but like because he's good about not making them too big, but he's really good about doing the line by line thing too of like, hey, this is a chunk where you really need to pay attention. I'm gonna call this piece out because this actually is good. If you understand this, the rest of this will make sense, you know. And just the little extra intentionality in when you're writing up a PR goes such a long way for the reviewers. It does feel like overhead sometimes, and it does feel like overkill sometimes, but it really is, especially during a fully distributed environment like we are now, where you can't just walk over to someone's desk and ask them a question as like casually. But in any situation, I think it's great because it also you gotta be careful because I don't want to divulge any client details, but like I was working on a project and someone in the engineering team said it's also a record, so that if someone comes in and is getting caught up on a project, they can go back through those PRs, and it's kind of like cheap documentation at that point because you can see why decisions were made and sort of like the public record of what happened. And so it may seem like, sometimes it does seem like a overkill in the moment, but you're actually establishing history as well. And the more that you do that, the more you show discussion on a PR, the more that you talk about it there versus like in a Slack channel that gets archived, the more that people can understand the thought that went into this and how the team was thinking about this as a whole, instead of just one person who has like a single thing they push up with very little explanation and someone just approves it. It really does change the way. And I think, if we were to think about some of the like best things we've viewed on GitHub or wherever, it's when there's a lot of interaction, right? So you have to think about that. That takes work, but it really does add to the value for everybody.
Yeah, especially being like the code we work on, we don't actually own. So we don't know who's going to touch it in the future or who's going to have to entirely figure out what was going on without being able to talk to us or anything.
I'm just thinking of all the code bases I've walked into where I'm like, why would they do it that way? Like, and I'm sure there's a reason, but yeah, I mean, I would love to see an example of, places where Byron's done that, CK, because that sounds awesome and really helpful.
I'd love to see that too. I just want to echo Kylie's point as well about the commits, because I try to do that more frequently. Is using the commits for that purpose, that you don't have to do the comments in the end, is just make each chunk something that is consumable, and you can click through the history of commits and see what the developer was thinking. I think that's a really valuable technique. I'm glad Kylie highlighted that.
And then the nice thing you can also do is, what I love about that approach and with latest GitHub developments is if you're afraid that somebody would accidentally merge like multiple commits from one branch into master, you can restrict your settings to where it has to be a squash merge before it goes into master. So you get clean merges and you also get to keep tracking history. Because like you said, the one thing I've always hated about doing like squash merges and stuff is anytime you do a force push on something, you can always make a mistake that you can't undo. And so it's great that they have all these safeguards in place that allows us to do like you suggested, Byron, do individual commits. That way, if you find an issue, you can find the commit that introduced that issue and fix it. And then once it's all done, easily have a cleanup with just a one-click button.
Here.
Actually, how do you guys think like everybody gets better at that, right? Is it just a matter of sort of like having these discussions and then, staying mindful while you're doing your work to try to introduce some of these things? Like, how do you build up to actually always thinking and always implementing these types of things?
I think honestly, Gabby, that's just the right answer. Is just a collaboration. A lot of the stuff is experience driven. So when you're learning Git workflows and what works best, a lot of it comes by what have you done in the past that works well? What have you done that doesn't work well? And yeah, there's a lot of textbooks you can read, but until you dive into it, you don't get a good feel for what's good for your organizations. So by having these collaboration meetings and talking with other people, you can say like, hey, here's the approach we did. And then you have examples of working project to say, here's why I recommend this. here's why I don't recommend this approach.
I feel like for me, what makes it a little bit easier to like integrate like the frequent commits and stuff into my process is just I usually start out on a task with like trying to think through the big steps that I'm going to have to go through in order to build out a feature. And so then when I'm going through my list of things I'm supposed to be doing, once I've finished one, then I'm like, okay, well, let me just commit that real quick, and I'm going to start this next task that I have. And so for me, it just is kind of, it fits kind of seamlessly into my process and kind of reinforces that.
Yeah, and you've been really good at that. And I again, like seeing that the step-by-step processes is really helpful. I think another thing that can be hard to get over is sharing partial work and being comfortable with that. I think it's something at Crema we are as a whole trying to embrace. Is like, it's okay if something's not finished. Like, show your work, show it in a partial state, and that can be very, very hard to do at an emotional level, because yeah, it's just hard because you don't feel like it represents the best you can do and all that. So getting over that and recognizing that good work is always a process, and it's a learning process where you're going to make mistakes, go back and fix those mistakes. Yeah, there's no shame in showing that process to your teammates, especially who are all going through that same thing. So just as a team, reinforcing that, hey, it's okay. Like, yeah, I'm going to have feedback and suggestions, but it's really as a team our way of getting better, right? So
that goes for like tooling as well, right? Being able to decide what you use, how you use it, you know, how you select different things. There's some comments in here in the chat around tooling, and I think it like that also has to be a collaborative thing, right? It has to be, whether it's, you know, do I use a framework, or do I use a pre-built module, or do I use something I roll, you know, just roll my own? Like, that has to be something you're deciding as a team. How does that impact the rest of the people on your team? How does it impact your client, your future people who are doing maintenance? Like, we don't often carry the maintenance of our project. We're usually handing it over to a team that we've either trained or we've educated on how to use what we built. So, you know, that you're thinking about like the future impact of people doing it as well. So yeah, like Macy in chat had that specific question. I thought this was a good like a good segue into that, just because it was, you know, it's a team affair the whole time, right? So even within what you guys do day to day, I know some of us can't talk about what we work on, but do the choices of frameworks and libraries and modules and stuff like that, or when to do something completely, you know, just vanilla, does that often have this kind of same component of like getting the feedback, showing your work early, working through it as a team, maybe even before code is being written? Does anybody
Definitely
have an anecdote?
Definitely before code's being written, because at that point you're kind of almost committed, right? I think it's just taking a look at the constraints. Every project has unique constraints. Maybe they come to you with a specific tech stack in mind, which we've absolutely had. Or maybe sometimes they're like, we just want to work with you. Like, what tech stack do you want? Just taking a look at all the constraints. Like, what is the team good at? What does the product need? What's some prior art? Like, do you have stuff you can look at that we've done before? There's a lot of things you can look at. But doing that before you start writing code and doing it early and getting as many opinions as you can.
yeah, I think appreciating the cost to the team at large when making what might be kind of a superfluous change from just on a whim. I think that's something that's very tempting to do. Like, oh, this new library came out, I want to use this, or this new state management system. It's like, okay, that's great. And those will always keep coming, right? And we should be aware, and it's fun to learn those things and really honestly assess the benefits that they might provide. But there's also a cost. There's a switching cost too. And so I think as a team, it's incumbent on us to take all the constraints into consideration when we're choosing a stack for our clients, because we also have to consider how easy is it going to be for them to hire their own team to maintain this. not just what do we like or what's hot right now. I think it goes beyond that. So when we're going to, if we're going to be tempted to write something from scratch because we think we can do it better, we have to take into account, oh, we're also going to have to provide at least as good of documentation as would be available on a public third-party open source library, right? That's a feature that it's going to be really hard to reproduce unless you are really committed. And so you have to ask yourself, do I really want to reinvent the wheel, or should we pull in a third-party library that's community support and awesome documentation and team buy-in and learning has already happened against that. So I can think of many examples there. So I think it's all of those considerations that you need to take into account before you kind of just decide those choices. So.
We do have a couple questions in here on the React Native Flutter, kind of, you know, the going back and forth between these two, trying to figure out what to learn, which again, like we're saying, is often a team sport. You know, you're trying to figure out like, actually in the most recent video, so if you go to our channel, the 2020 Flutter React Native, we sort of rehashed that topic a year later. And that balance between which frameworks you choose actually came up in a pretty big way. So some of the stuff that we said there is kind of what we're saying here of what is your team support, you know, what is your client support, what's the ongoing future support. So I think a lot of this plays into the same theme of it takes an intentional view of how is your team comprised and then what is needed at the moment, but also what is going to be kind of future thinking about, you know, you're kind of paying it forward to yourself or to whomever is doing development after you all the time. And in thinking in development in general, that's just something that we do maybe without realizing it, but you certainly feel it when you add something that adds a lot of weight to a system, and then your future self has to inherit that code base. So, or like Gabby said, when you walk into a code base and you realize that someone didn't have that kind of like pay it forward mentality. So even in some of the comparisons between these different frameworks that you could choose, I think it has to at least involve this idea of like, okay, well, someone has to maintain this. And if it's not me, would I want to inherit this, you know? So sometimes you can get away with like exploring something new, or sometimes you need to stick to something that's tried and true, just depending on your team. So those are really good. And then, yeah, and then Justin is talking about how important it is to be sharing between other frameworks you might be using across your organization. But those good thoughts in chat. I wanted to call those out.
Yeah, something we're definitely always doing is keeping a pulse on the new fun stuff. Like we're always playing around with that, trying that, because I mean that's why we're doing React so often now here at Crema. Like it started out as, oh, it's this new cool thing, let's try it out. And now at this point, it's a large chunk of what we're doing. So I think it's definitely important to keep a pulse on new stuff, play around with it. Like during Lab Fridays, we have time as a team to try out new things or learn new things. It's definitely hugely important to do that.
Yeah, and if you're just learning and trying to decide which of some choices to buy into, don't feel anxious about like getting stuck into one. Like if you learn a bunch of stuff in React Native, a lot of those learnings apply to Flutter as well, like the component-based organization or just programming in general. Like you're never really stuck in one world.
It's definitely constant learning. There's always going to be a new framework. There's always going to be new tools. And if it makes sense for you to adopt that as a developer, hopefully the collaboration and the learning spaces that you have, you know, help you learn those new things. So yeah, it's just constant learning, and you don't have to feel stuck for sure.
Yeah, I feel like there's also other considerations outside of the actual end product, like your familiarity with the testing ecosystem. How do you go about integrating these tools into your current set of standards? These are other things that need to be answered. So again, it's easy to kind of think you're making a decision in a vacuum, but you really shouldn't be. There's all these other considerations, and So if you are, say, going to switch frameworks, but that means you have to learn a whole new ecosystem of testing tools, et cetera, that's again something that you need to consider at a team level, because a lot more goes into producing professional software than just writing an app, right? How are you going to deploy it? How are you going to, how's it going to integrate with the inevitable other applications that exist for this product? There's always going to be a web admin application. There's always going to be probably multiple client-side applications, whether it's mobile or web, probably both. So how do you maintain sanity while producing this ecosystem of applications, and then make sense of how you hand that over to the client, especially as a firm like us, where we're building things for other people. So we have to think what's going to make sense for them. You know, are they going to have to hire a team of devs or 2 teams of devs or 1 team? You know, so yeah, it's fun to think through all those those constraints. Can be confusing though too.
Do we have any final questions or final thoughts anyone wants to shout out? CK, any more questions in chat?
There is one. I think that there was some good comments in there about just trying to take on new learning in a sustainable way, which is hard. I'm very excitable, as my team knows, and it's very easy to, you know, to just rush through and get into different lines of exploration or different frameworks and stuff. But I think the theme that we have here is definitely on the impact that can have as a group and the importance of that, which is why we love doing even just these dev chats bi-weekly, because it's a chance for us to kind of all collaborate. And sometimes you can see someone who's kind of starting to race out into the sunset a little bit, and you're like, come back, you know? So it's good. I mean, exploration is important, but I do think there's been some good talk in there about just tempering that with, you know, what you can do at the moment and iterate on that slowly. There was a comment in here about understanding, you know, what you write and how well you would understand that. I think the heart behind it is probably like, do you need to understand the entire business or use case for everything that you write, instead of like, I don't know what I'm typing kind of thing, is my guess. So that was that's the only other one in there, but there's been some good discussion. I appreciate everybody chiming in live in the chat.
I think some of the other things that we do as a team, more recently, we've some of the other devs have started a book club where we focused on, you know, we pick a book, and I think the last one was clean code. So I mean, that's generally applicable, trying to learn the craft of programming. And so we're always working on the basics too, right? So right now we're going through a TypeScript book. So a lot of us write TypeScript in our day-to-day. And so a lot of times you are writing code that you might not quite understand. You just kind of intuitively know how to work with it. Maybe if I'm getting at that question indirectly there, about understanding all the code you write. Sometimes you don't understand exactly how everything works. And but we as a team try to continue to press into those topics and kind of, I don't know, fight back the fog of war, so to speak, or eliminate some of that mystery around some of the tools we use. And I think that allows us to use our tools in a more efficient way, obviously, and then we can teach others in a more accurate way too. So it's part of that.
For me, that's where the Crema values of continuous learning and collaboration come in, because yeah, you get to work together all in the same process, because you're never going to know all the things, and whatever it is that even something that you've been using for years and that you know the most about, you're not going to know all of the little things about it. So yeah, just collaborating and continuous learning are going to be huge to allow you to keep iterating on on what you know. And then sometimes, yeah, you do kind of like have to get something done and you're like, I don't know why this works, but it works. And it's helpful to have that collaboration too with other people to get that kind of input there too.
That's good stuff.
Also, okay not to know everything, right? So it's okay to appreciate the fact that you sit on top of hundreds of layers of abstraction and you can still be a programmer, you can still be a dev, you can still be a senior dev, you know, whatever that looks like, and not fully know all of the intermediate steps below what you're writing, whether that's through the framework or just the language you're using, whether you're writing JavaScript or whatever. Yeah, there's always layers of abstraction, and it's okay to dig into those and try to understand them, but it's also okay to just trust that they work sometimes and just get it done.
Yeah, it can be really important to know what you don't need to know. And that might be like a senior dev type skill to work on. Just being able to ignore like how the browser is actually rendering these boxes on my screen, or like how the processor is actually interacting with the programs. Like, I don't know how any of that stuff works. So
yeah, what is code?
All right. Well, we're basically we're over time now. So this has been awesome, everyone. I think this was fun. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe to this channel. We'll probably do this again. I think it was fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Good discussion, everyone. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
See
See
you
ya.
guys.
Bye, all.
See ya.
Yeah.